Hi, this is my YouTube channel, What's Wrong with the World and How to Fix It. I'm Dr. Terry Lay. The subtitle of the channel is History, Human Nature and Society Today. I'm interested in looking at some of the deeper issues which lie behind some of our current problems, and my background's in sociology, so I'm talking about typical sociological topics, but also topics of general interest. And this one's called Boys to Men. It's about the process by which the particular kind of way of being as a man comes to exist socially. What are the kind of structures which make this happen? And this is like the third in the series that I've been giving on the topic of aggression. And so this one arises from something of a puzzle. I mean, I've explained the sociological view of aggression, and I've talked about why the evolutionary theory of, an urge to kill doesn't really make a lot of sense. But at the same time, you'd have to say that one of the things that it kind of has going for it is that it reflects the reality of world history, in which, aggression is really common, and violent wars are a very common feature of humanity, in a way that it's not necessarily true of other species of mammals, that they don't seem to fight to the death in the same way as human beings do. And so why is this so common? So there are some obvious explanations of the presence of physical aggression and conflict in human history, which is like aggression's used as a means to control people. So in a class society, the ruling class manipulates the soldier armed forces, if you like, to control the peasantry, and the peasantry are being screwed to within an inch of their life, and they react back, and they have to be controlled by armed force and so on and so forth. I mean, yeah, that's certainly true. People develop aggression in order to defend themselves against the aggression of other people. And this is all somewhat obvious, but it's hard to reconcile with the fact that a lot of aggression seems excessive. It's hard to reconcile with the fact of the huge risks men take to be involved in aggression against other people. Often without any obvious advantage. And it doesn't really explain why this aggressive behaviour is mostly the domain of men, not to say that women aren't ever involved in it, and clearly they are, but I mean, it's like, like, I don't know, at least 8 times out of 10, it's coming from men, and it's often directed against men as well. Okay, so what are the aspects of male violence? Things like gendered violence, domestic violence, obviously, sexual assault, which we hear a lot about at the moment, civil violence, fights, and, like fights between men in a pub, but also duels, like in the feudal period, feuds in other societies, bullying, like in the playground, whatever. This kind of violence, quite common. And then there's warfare, of course, which is depressingly common, and often achieves nothing, and the parties, just kill each other, and oh, that's brilliant, including genocide against whole populations. And all of this behaviour displays an appalling lack of empathy, really, and it's a bit paradoxical in the sense that one of the things that humans enjoy is looking after other people and getting the social rewards and pleasures of being friends with people, and aggression always cuts against that, as I've said before. So there are some obvious explanations of why violent behaviour is located in men, so I'll talk about them. One is to control women as an underclass, so that men get other satisfactions, like someone else doing the housework, and menial work while they swan about and do things that achieve more power and status. I mean, like, okay, so they're getting something out of that domination of women, and in order to reinforce that domination, various kinds of violence, like including domestic violence and so on, are being used. I could talk about that at length, but I won't at the moment. But even so, sometimes this seems excessive and well beyond what's necessary to achieve these goals that men have. One could also say that because men control politics in societies, they take on the burden of violence, you know, like against other men. So that if politics is a realm of conflict between different social groups and so on, and then who's in control of politics? Well, in a patriarchy, men have got control of power in general, so obviously they have control of politics. And so when these conflicts between groups become violent, it'll be men who are involved in this violence. And that certainly makes sense and explains to an extent why women are not so much caught up in this as men are. And you could say about what I think is probably important to say about this, that it's a risk to patriarchy if women are in control of violence. So in a sense, in a patriarchal society, it's no accident that men are mostly the ones with, you know, long spears and hunting weapons and bows and arrows and engaged in violence against other men and so forth, because women, they don't want women to take these kind of controls. It's not just, you know, not just for other reasons about sort of sexual difference or something. And we can say that this becomes then a cost of patriarchy for men. You know, like men can say, oh, look, I'm so disadvantaged, I have to go off to war and fight other men. Well, yeah, okay, yeah, that is certainly a cost, but it's a cost of patriarchy. In other words, it's an inevitable in a situation where men control political life. But all that being said, I want to go on and say something more about this, which is that I like the term toxic masculinity. In Australia, it's been popularized by Clementine Ford, a feminist writer. And it's used to it doesn't mean that all masculinity is toxic. What it means is that there's certain ways in which masculinity is created and structured in particular social contexts, which makes it toxic. And what I'd like to do in this talk is to say, okay, so let's try and work out exactly what is toxic masculinity, what are its characteristics, and how does it come about? So I'd start off with this. In patriarchal societies, there's a particular pattern to how men are brought up as boys. You know, like that's why this talk's called From Boys to Men. It creates a psychology of competitive striving to beat other men. It works against empathetic relationships with women. It fosters anxiety in men about their claim to be regarded as a real man. You know, like, am I a real man? Oh my God. And aggression is one manifestation of this psychological pattern. So, okay, so competitive striving is part of toxic masculinity, if you like, but it's not just that. It also includes physical aggression against women, children, other men, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about how this comes about and relate this to the way childhoods take place in a typical patriarchal context. So men being the rulers of society, if you like, the ruling class, gender class, are concerned with affairs of state, with the public world, with business in the public world. They engage in undertakings which confer status and social power. And you could say, oh my God, no, look at the poor working class man, you know, like he's just going to the factory every day, or, you know, like, and I mean, it's ridiculous to speak about him as gaining social power, but actually compared to his partner, he is in a heterosexual couple, he actually does have public power through the process of getting a wage income that's higher than the woman's is typically likely to be. So this is a pattern which exists even in our kind of, in quotes, liberated societies today. So what men tend to avoid, because it ties you down and is a work and so on and takes you away from this public world, is the work associated with caring for small children and infants. Women do most of that work. And my argument is that it's not a biological necessity. Yeah, okay, we could talk about breastfeeding as part of this work and say, yeah, that's a biological necessity that women do that. But it's no biological necessity that men are involved in the other parts of the care of infants and small children, like, you know, rocking them to sleep, pacifying them when they cry, you know, taking them for a walk around the block, changing the nappy, etc., etc. And that these kind of tasks exist in every society. That it's typical for women to be the ones with infants doing the, if it's hunting and gathering, they're doing the gathering with the infants on the hips and so forth and so on. and this kind of care work that women do with infants creates emotional ties. In other words, the person who's looking after the small child or infant ends up by having an emotional tie with that child. It's hard to do that kind of emotional work without creating that emotional tie. And what my theory is that this actually, this is, men avoid this partly because it's come about in patriarchy, if you like, that they avoid this work, partly because it creates these emotional ties which tie you down, you know, that they hamper your free action. So this pattern, what is the effect of this pattern? For the boy growing up, it creates what I call the puzzle of masculinity. Most of experiences of nurture and being looked after in early childhood come from women. The young infant boy identifies with women. You know, like, and what is it to be human? Well, obviously these women are a classic example of an adult human person, and you know, like, you identify with them, you have this close emotional tie with them as an infant boy and a young boy growing up, and so on and so forth. At a certain point, boys, you know, like, and this is sort of variable, it occurs anything between 5 and 25, you know, like but it's typically associated with adolescence is when it becomes really strong. Boys are urged to give up this identification with women and to develop themselves as men. This is why the phrase boys to men is, you know, and separating the men from the boys is a sort of common phrase in English is such an important thing to think about. And it leads to a puzzling demand for boys, you know, like, what is a man? I mean, in other words, these are boys who haven't had much intimate and close experience with their fathers or with other adult men who are off there in the, you know, in the public world doing things and so on, and kind of powerful figures, but they're not intimately connected with them. They're not in daily kind of affectionate and close physical relationships with these men. So they can't say, oh, well, it's just being like that. You know, well, obviously they do that to a certain extent, but it's difficult. So they're encouraged to solve this problem, to become a man by rejecting femininity. Okay, so everything that you associate with the mothers and the women who've looked after you, you're told to reject that. You're not to be a mummy's boy, you know, like, in other words, you're to sort of man up, become like other men, like remote men, and that must mean being different from these women. Now, what is associated with these women is this emotional connection with the infant, this kind of nurturing, this empathetic relationship between infants and their female carers. So the second thing is that they're urged to establish their adult masculinity through competition with other men. In other words, how to prove that you're a man: beat some other man, you know, like an adult man, if you like, be up there with the real men. And this leads to one of the things that this kind of awkward problem leaves for men is the anxiety of, am I man enough? Do I actually make the grade and cut it as a man? And now this kind of competition that men are involved in isn't just physical fighting competition, it's also other competitive behaviour and a lack of empathy generally. And this is expressed in business competition, in warfare, in, you know, things as minor as driving and how you ride your bike on a public pathway and so on. I mean, it's everywhere. Okay, so this separation between men and boys, this kind of separation, like becoming a man and so on, is often marked by a ritual initiation. And if we look at, you know, society studied by anthropologists, you know, in something relatively close to their pre-colonial condition, we can see quite a few examples of this around the world. In fact, it's very common as to be almost universal. And like my own kind of reading on this would be, I'll just mention a few examples. The Mundurucu, who are a society from the Amazon, there's really good stuff on that. Mbuti people, who are the pygmies of the forest in the Congo. In the Melanesian societies, which have been massively studied by anthropologists, and Indigenous Australia, which of course, same thing. So what's a typical pattern of this initiation throughout all of these different cultures, right? This is not, in a sense, it's no accident that this structure of patriarchy is reflected in all of them. The boys who are coming of age are separated from women in the camp and taken out into the forest. The adult men adopt the role of terrifying spirit beings. Often they're concealed and they're just making a terrifying noise or whatever, or they're blowing this sort of magic flute or something like that, or a bull roar or whatever. And the myth is that these actually are dangerous, terrifying spirit beings. So, and the boys are taken by the adult men into the forest and undergo initiation ceremonies, which usually involve some kind of painful ritual, sort of minor torture, like, for example, boys are being thrown onto a burning fire or something like that. Back at the village, the women are weeping. Oh, our children are being taken away from us. Our sons are being taken away from us, and so forth and so forth. And then the boys return as adult men to the village and adopt their adult male role. Now, we can look at this as, you know, like, we can look at this in a very kind of naively optimistic, romantic way, if you like, and say, oh my God, at least these societies celebrate the ritual of becoming an adult. Well, yeah, that's true. Also, that's true, and that makes sense, and so forth. But what we also need to realize is that it's a classic example of initiation into masculinity, into patriarchy, and it takes this particular form because of that, and works in that way. In contemporary Western societies, there's no kind of comparable ritual of that type. You know, if we accept particular religious cultures like bar mitzvah or something like that, maybe, but mostly in kind of secular contemporary global culture, there's nothing that really fits that bill. On the other hand, there are various sort of minor things which actually, like getting your driving license, is really a key for boys. Playing football, an aggressive, dangerous sport, you know, like I remember I was taken by my father to play football, and at the end of the session, I must have been about 10, the coach said to my dad, "Oh, just hasn't got much tiger." Now, I regret that now. I mean, I wish I'd really got into football, because now I really enjoy watching it. But I mean, all I can say about it at the time is I was classic. I was really rejecting that sort of masculine role as an adult and going, no, this initiation is not for me. And we can see it reflected in religious stories, like the story of Abraham and Isaac. You know, God tells Abraham to sacrifice his eldest son Isaac on a stone. Oh my God, he's got the knife ready to kill him. And an angel comes down and says, "Oh, now I can see you truly fear God, so don't bother, do something else, you know, like go and sacrifice a goat or something." I mean, yeah, what is that all about? So what it's about is this hierarchy of dangerous, terrifying men, you know, like showing no empathy to their sons, right? And like, yeah, that's a classic. So this is a project of recruitment into patriarchy. So when, like, I hate the phrase "not all men," but I think it's important to realize that not all biological men are equally inducted into this, that they don't necessarily take this on. And that this kind of popping out of the patriarchal mold is happening all over the place in current society, as it is so thoroughly influenced by feminism. And I think if you're a male and you go, "Oh, toxic masculinity, how dare you accuse me of that?" Like, get over it, really. I mean, one is it's everywhere, so don't pretend that it isn't. And two, you know, if you don't want to be a toxic male, then you do something different. You know, behave differently. It's not that difficult. What I'd also say is that even if we look at other societies, that biologically men don't necessarily adopt that patriarchal masculine role. And so we could look at the Burdash in North American native societies, the Hedra in South Asia, the Fafahini in the Pacific, and and like realize that in a sense it's no accident that these sort of non-binary gender roles or effeminate gender roles were also available to biological men in the past, because being recruited into patriarchy is a terrifying business and actually comes with quite a few downsides. And what we can say today is that people who are now who are termed sissies or sensitive new age guys or whatever are maybe men who are trying to rejecting this process of recruitment. So what I'd say is that we're seeing more and more of this since feminism in the 70s, the second wave of the feminist movement, and that there's more like single women headed households where a patriarchal father figure isn't part of the landscape of the immediate experience of the child. We're seeing more nurturing men encouraged by feminism to realize some advantages in being, having good relationships with women. And we're seeing more equal parenting, although it's very difficult within current work structures to do that. And there's more awareness of the problems that this lack of empathy is causing us. I mean, like we've just had a terrible scandal in Australia with our special air service forces in Afghanistan, shooting unarmed civilians, executing people who had posing no particular threat, and like people are not happy with that behavior any longer. In a period in the past, it would have been swept under the rug. Now, and I might trace this to the influence of feminism in the last 40 years or whatever. This kind of behavior is just not on, and is regarded as nasty and awful as it is. Okay, I'll finish this up now, and next time I'm going to be talking about what is patriarchy and trying to explain how patriarchy comes about and what people mean when they're talking about patriarchy, something which I think some people find difficult to work through. Okay.